So thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Guillaume, for joining us today. Take a seat. So as Sarah mentioned, there's no better person to be with us to talk about apps because Guillaume's told me that he's invested in countless of different companies that deploy apps. So a true expert with us.
Yeah, maybe just a small word because just a humility word. I mean, I'm just an investor, so I sit and watch because I have a check. People listen usually, but I'm not the one who actually codes and deploys and so on. So in front of a crowd of developers and marketers and so on for apps. So I'm not the expert. I just give you the view of an investor.
You can tell us how to make some money.
Yeah.
We all don't mind that. That's fine.
I can give you, a complimentary view on, what in the eyes of investors should work and should not work. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So as Sarah mentioned, the format of our segment is going to be a little bit different, right? So you can see behind us we have "Excuse the Interruption." I'm just going to get the clicker. And some of you might have heard of the American game show "Pardon the Interruption." And basically, in a nutshell, what happens is you go through themes and questions, but on a timer. So Guillaume will have 2 minutes to answer a question on each theme. And if he goes over 2 minutes, he's going to hear the sound of the gong, right? And that's it. You're done with that theme. Yeah. So you're going to have to get straight to the point, right? We want your honest opinion, honest advice.
Okay.
Right. I need a volunteer, if anyone can help me, someone who's willing to bang the gong. We'll have a timer up behind us, so you'll see when 2 minutes is up. Anyone willing to bang the gong?
If you want to bang an investor.
Give her a tap. We've had somebody volunteer someone else, and she's not expecting it. I know she's shaking her head. Come on, it's just a bang of a gong. What's your name? Elsa. Brilliant. Elsa, where are you from?
France.
Right, brilliant. So I need you to be strict with the timings. You're going to see the clock up here, and when it hits 2 minutes, I want you to bang the gong. Do you want to give it a try? All right, you can do it harder, but yeah. Okay. Right, Guillaume, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
We're going to do 3 rounds, and the first one is called the rundown. Right, so in this round, I'm just going to ask you a question on the theme. You've got 2 minutes. All right, so the first theme is app first. So we know that in many countries, mobile traffic has now overtaken desktop. And we heard from Sandra earlier that now 85% of time is spent in apps versus 14% on a mobile site. So my question is, are we at a point where companies should think app first?
Yeah, okay, 2 minutes. So it depends on what you do. More or less, if you have an app-centric business, or if you have a business that is like already deployed offline and you use an app to extend it, obviously, it depends. I would say the apps allow you, for instance, if you communicate, obviously, an app in a phone allows you to communicate as a desktop doesn't, offer so many ways of communication. If you're in a utility, for instance, app, you need sensors, you need a GPS location, you need voice recognition, microphones and things like that you would have on a mobile phone that you don't have on a desktop. So obviously there, for utilities, I guess apps get first. And if you talk about content, then it's a bit of a mix, I guess. So I'm an investor in Deezer, for instance, an equivalent to Spotify, so music streaming business. We started as a web business. 90% of the newcomers were web-oriented, like 6-7 years ago. And then it moved totally to a mobile usage today. We attract 90% of your users through mobile. So there are businesses that totally flipped to the app business. But if I take YouTube, for instance, my kids are using YouTube a lot, and I use YouTube a lot. I use YouTube as much as I use Google, I would say, as a search engine and to learn about something. There's so much video content today on YouTube that I use it as a Google search more or less. And I use it both as an app and as a web app as well. So I would, type wherever from the YouTube website on my mobile, or whether use the YouTube app as well. So if you talk about content, I think there's much more relationship between, 10 seconds, okay. But then if you use an app, of course, discovery is much better because you have those app stores, so it's not only search-centric. You have interactions, you have notifications. Yeah.
You hit that very softly as well, very kind, very kind.
Okay.
All right, so our second theme
This is tough.
Key people, right? So we see a huge developer-only community in the app market, but what key people do you need in every mobile app business to be successful?
Okay. So obviously you have developers who do, some kind of founder who has an idea, hire developers who develop themselves the app, and so on and so on. What I think is super interesting is how many people actually are targeting a market, targeting users and so on, and let those apps leak, I would say. So not really looking at how an app can be successful, but how an app can not be unsuccessful. More or less tweaking the UX, tweaking the UI, making the UI the best experience ever. Most about the business is about explaining what you do in an app. So the tutorial thing is very, very tricky, and most people would do text-based tutorial. I never read on an iPhone, more or less. I never read in a game or something like that. I read books, but I don't read an app. And everything that has to be oriented with UI. So the UI people would be my key guys, I would say, among top of the developer. And then people who talk about the UX, which is like, where do I lose people? I have a game company in my portfolio who spent about a third of its entire project over 2 years to do a first game, a third of the entire project on the first minute. They built 600 iterations of the same game, 600 builds on the first minute. How do I hook my guys? How do I do the onboarding? When you are on a free app, when you're hooked for the first minute, if you fast the first minute, then you probably are going to stay for the 6 or 7 minutes left for the entire session. So UX, UI for me would be the main thing. And how do you solve the leakage, more or less? When do you lose people? Analyzing very, very densely with the analytic guy. So analytics, of course. Studying second after second what people do in the first minute, more or less, and why they leave.
Great. Ooh, just in time.
Because I'm looking at this now.
Okay, our third theme is user acquisition.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we have 1.5 million apps in each app store. We heard about this earlier, but 60% of the apps in these app stores have never been downloaded. So my question is, when do you think is the right moment to start focusing on user acquisition?
Yeah, so I do games mostly. For games, obviously, there's a discovery problem. I mean, you have so many games on an app store today that people figure out, if I do a game, how are they going to be recognized? So obviously, there's this featuring, help that you can get from the platform. So talking to Apple and Google help you get featured, and you could get, acquisition more or less later on. Usually, I say people. I see that you don't mix acquisition and featuring. If you do both at the same time, then your numbers are blurred. You don't really know what comes from what channel. So it's difficult. So people would probably start without acquisition. Obviously, you need a little bit of push. So most games would be, or apps would be, you test on a small market. You get your KPIs first. It gives you retention. It gives you maybe monetization as well sometimes. And you can more or less figure out if you're totally out of the goal, or if you just have to optimize a little bit what you need. D1 50%, 45%, D7 25, 30%, and you can go on. Then you need a bit of a push for the first days, but then most people would think I can't build a business without user acquisition. There are numerous examples of games that actually made it without any kind of user acquisition budget at first. More or less for me, user acquisition is more like a way to accelerate something that is good enough already, to leverage it, but you will never have a bad game that is actually working well because it had a huge user acquisition budget. User acquisition is just something to enable you to emphasize discovery and emphasize installations and so on. But then what you care about is the D30, D40, and so on, where people can use your app, play your game for 6 to 9 months, even more, right? So 5 seconds. For the next question, I get an extra 5 seconds.
All right, so moving on to demographics. So believe it or not, my nephew, who's only 2.5, he has his favourite apps. He loves games, he has lots of video apps. And Sandra talked a bit to us about youth. But I'm going to ask you, what demographic group do you think has the highest potential in the app space?
So we talked about Asia being dominant, 60% of Chinese people being less than 25 years old. In fact, if you look at the mobile business today, mobile revenues, it's about 25% US and 75% the rest of the world. Okay. And obviously, the population is older in the US than in the rest of the world today. If you talk about consumption and so on. Games for games only, and then maybe apps is the same. But for games, like 30% today of people who play games on mobile are more than 50 years old. More than 50 years old. 29%. 16% are less than 8 years old. 81% of the mothers in the US play games on mobile, and 2/3 of the time with their kids. So actually, it's family stuff as well. So we all know that people who play games today are more like female today. 54% women and 48%, 46% male, and so on. So it's the gaming business entirely moved from targeting geeks of 18 years old to 24. Technophile people playing violent games, more or less, or first-person shooters and so on, to games that are more or less today puzzle games, word games, and so on. So it has become mainstream. So people who play and use mobile games or mobile apps today are the ones that go into HMV, Walmart. They're exactly the same population. So you have to be. You talk to people who read newspapers and watch TV, more or less. So it's an entertainment business today, as much as it is a utility business and so on. So, but you can obviously get different monetization schemes. The older people would spend more. The youngest obviously don't spend. So then you have to check about whether you want to do a free-to-play app or whether you want to do a premium app, right? Premium would be for younger populations, I guess, and free-to-play would be for people who actually, when they want to. Go ahead. Okay, stop.
Don't look that excited about the gong.
This is stuff.
I was just going to say to you, actually, my brother works for King.com, and he's been trying to push the Candy Crush app on me, and I know what he's trying to do, and I'm not willing.
You're not playing?
Not willing, right.
Well, you don't know what you miss.
Do you like that game?
I love it. It's the best I've ever.
Oh, God. All right, so last theme in this round, right? Monetization. Can I say it properly? Right. So $41 billion in revenue has been generated in 2015 in the app stores. That's over 16% year-on-year growth. But we know that some of the largest and most well-known apps aren't being monetized, the likes of WhatsApp, Move It, Wallapop. So my question is, when is the best time to decide about the monetization of an app strategy?
Yeah. So as a startup company, you have two choices. Whether you make a utility and you don't automatically price it. You have no business model, more or less, no revenues and so on, but you try to sell the audience later on to a larger platform player and so on who needs, there's hundreds of millions of people who would spend 10 minutes on your app a day or something like that. So the Twitters, guys like this, who don't actually generate so much revenues for many years, but work on the audience. So you need to be sure that what you do, the only goal you do more or less is gathering more and more users without even having them paying anything. If you talk about free-to-play content, for instance, the difficult thing is, you need to make sure a good business is a business where you keep people for 6, 9 months, 2 years on your app, right? But you can't test that. You can't test your alpha version in New Zealand for 2 weeks and wait for D30 or D40 to come. So what I use usually, for new things that are innovative, D1, D7 retention is very important because you need to be sure that you hook people, more or less. But then after, I really look at monetization. Not really how much people spend, but what's the rate of conversion to paying users. Mm-hmm. Someone that uses a new app, a new game, and converts within the first week is more or less is giving you a go. Is giving you, okay, I understood the meta game, I can invest in this app long term, I can spend $5-10 on something that will not be lost in a week because I will stick to the app in a week from now. So for me, that's the best, rate of conversion is the best tool more or less to check about long-term retention. or long-term adoption, something like that. So if you can reach first cohorts, obviously the best ones, if you can reach 5, 6, 7% rate of conversion over a week when you test your app in any geography, then you have a go, more or less. You can think of it. And then the KPIs will help you size your marketing campaigns.
We'll find out more about KPIs later, so you can come back to that.
We talk later, huh?
All right, so we're on to our second game. This is What's the Word, right? So for this one, similar type run through, but you have to fill in the blank. I'll give you a little bit of context.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So our first theme is freemium versus premium. You mentioned these two words earlier. Yeah. So free-to-play apps or freemium is an app where you don't need to pay for the app, but you might do in-app purchases. So the vast majority of apps we might see out there. And then there's premium. So those are subscription type apps that you would pay to download, right? And you talked to us earlier about gaming, and I know you've made several investments in free-to-play mobile studios. So the blank I'd like you to fill in is, I, Guillaume, invest in free-to-play mobile studios because they...
Because they're 95% of the revenues on mobile, on Android, for instance, today. So premium, I mean, you get enormous, you get more or less with, I don't know about the numbers, but the range is like, you get 10 times less downloads if you do premium. If you ask people to pay before trying or before seeing an app, you get 10% of what you would get if it's a free app. So you get more downloads if it's free to play. And then because you don't force people to play, but there's a bunch of them who will like your app so much that they're ready to really invest, buy accessories and so on. It's like your old car, $5,000 US car that you like it so much you want to buy a super expensive hi-fi at the back of it, and you probably will have like shiny wheels at night or something like that. So there's a percentage of people who like their app, their game so much that they're ready to pay for it, to extend, to emphasize their experience. And those people have no budget, more or less. It's entertainment. So it would be what you spend in the weekends to go to movies, to ride horses, or to fly a plane, more or less. And then it depends on and revenues of those apps, more or less, can be tenfold compared to the premium apps. It's a bit of a shame for me. And in fact, those platforms like Apple, I don't know about Android, but Apple is really pushing more for premium games than free-to-play. There's this thing about, cheating people who pay too much when the basket is high and so on. But I think there should be more balance, I would say, in terms of business model between premium apps and free-to-play. I'm investing on free-to-play only because they're really making so much.
I'm going to stop you because I think your time's up.
Okay.
I know my slides are broken and I've lost Elsa. So it's all gone wrong. Where have you gone? Did you have enough?
There was no time.
How about you nominate someone else to hit the gong if you want? Get her back.
They're not interested.
Here we go. I know. Right. So, Next question. Are you ready to bang after 2 minutes? Yeah? You're not going to run away like Elsa, no? All right. Okay. So iOS versus Android. Right, here at Google, we're all very interested in comparisons between the two.
Yeah.
So my question is, iOS and Android behave like what in the app industry?
iOS, high RPPU, high revenues. Obviously, a lower number of iPhones in the world compared to Android phones today. So there's the volume effect that makes it for like a game, for instance. If you start in iOS and then switch to Android or add Android on the top of it, more or less you double your revenues. The volume effect will make it that there's equivalent revenues in terms of share between Android and iOS. Mm-hmm. Of course, this will lead for more Android domination in the future because the Android domination today in terms of OS on mobile is going obviously to bring more revenues and so on. There's a problem in monetization. If I look at the baskets of spending, they're exactly the same more or less on iOS and Android. So it's not really that the people who buy Android phones are ready to spend less because the phone is cheaper or something like that. Obviously, in regions like India, we don't compare, of course. But if we talk about Western countries, there's an issue which is like The rate of conversion to paying users is about 1/3 on Android of what it is on iOS. One of the reasons could be you have to put your credit card, more or less, details on iTunes if you want to download a game. Right? There are ways, of course, to get an ID for free, but it's quite different. I mean, only people who look for it know how to do it, right? Whereas on Android, you can actually download games without giving away your credit card, more or less. I think just, if I had just maybe an advice to Google, investor giving an advice to Google, okay? Make that credit card compulsory into an app store, into any Google App Store today, because people are used to pay. And then you would get much higher rate of conversion, I guess. It would push up numbers for anybody who does Android phones. Yeah,
do it from the offset.
Yeah.
So you mentioned KPIs earlier, and we all know that measuring success is important. But what I'd like to know is, what are the right KPIs app developers should be looking at?
So developers, yeah. So again, you try to reach a good rate of conversion. And you try to minimize your user acquisition as budget as well, because most of the companies would raise Series A, first round, to get the developers do the app, and then they would do the Series B. Potentially half of the Series B would be dedicated to user acquisition. So it costs the company a lot in terms of dilution, and it's crazy, more or less. I would love to fund more or less user acquisition on my P&L instead of funding it with shareholders and additional shareholders and so on. The way to do it is also to bring back virality. I have a game that was, Criminal Case. I don't know if you guys know. Criminal Case was developed with virality as first. People had to viralize more or less, had to invite at first session. If you invite at first session being 5 minutes, of course, not longer, it means you understood why people would be interested in playing the app or playing the game. It means you understood the metagame already. You're not ashamed to invite anybody. And it means what you get as a reward for an invite is something that is decent. People don't ask you to, you're not cheating in the game. It doesn't destroy the game. It doesn't spoil the experience by inviting people and so on. If you succeed in doing that, more or less virality at D1 is as much savings in the user acquisition budget as well on the long term. You get more people and so on. So for me, user acquisition is very early on in the design. If you can if you can have a very good onboarding so that you don't lose too many people, and if you can put virality at first, then it's user acquisition becomes even more efficient. More or less. Okay. So it's rate of conversion and forgetting about all the, taking care about all the people who would leave your app. So, left on session compared to competition, minuting more or less, looking second by second why people would leave, when do they leave, what's the, go on, sorry. Okay.
Some help from the audience.
Okay.
She was listening, see, she was interested. Yeah. There you go. So investment strategy. So many app developers in the audience, and we also have many app-focused businesses. Yeah. But if you had another 10 million to invest in any of these companies, what would you be looking for? So what would you want to see?
Yeah, so I do invest in content today, which is games. Based in Europe and so on. I mean, more or less, you use an app. I would say if we can, 3 different categories. There's one which is communication, social networks, voice, text, or video, whatever, communication. On one side, there's another which is utilities, Dropbox, Evernote, stuff like that, maps and so on. And then there's another one which is content. Communication, more or less, you do that hoping for hundreds of millions of users and then maybe selling your business later on to a platform like Android, Apple, and so on. Utilities, same thing. You need to find a very different business model. You need to check that you have a margin at the end of the day. So you need to more or less think ahead, 5 years ahead, something like that. What can be my app? And in 5 years, is it profitable to have a business model? Those are very difficult questions. for me. And so I think content is still unexploited. It's still, it's still the beginning of what you can get as content on a phone. Games are one part. There are many genres that still don't exist on mobile phones today. And if you talk about video, for instance, or the integration of video as content, YouTube is great. I mean, this is my favorite app, but there's a lot of things
I paid him to say that.
Sorry?
I paid you to say that. So.
No, but it's really my kids, for more or less, if you look at your kids, okay, my kids 5 and 7, so we fight in order to reduce, obviously, the time they spend on their iPads, but they would spend 50% of the time playing games, some of them educational games, of course, and then 50% of the time watching YouTube, because they can't write or read. Well, they learn it, but I mean, they just arrived in the UK, so they can't. Yeah, okay. So, content.
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 All right, and our final question in this round. So, just keen to hear more about where you think the app industry is heading. So, the question is, in the next 5 years, I foresee the app industry being...
Okay, so the app industry in 5 years. So I'm still wondering what's going to be the share of mobile web and apps. There's a lot of content that you can push on mobile web. Mobile web, I think, is less expensive, easier to develop, but you need this discovery. You need, Google search or other discovery tools, and obviously the app stores are a difficult way to, make you discover it, especially if you have a mobile web website. So for me, I'm still thinking today the apps are first, but I think there's still a future for a browser, for Chrome, for Safari and so on. And I think that, we should find more ways. I'm still thinking that there's a lot of potential for ads on mobile that are still unexploited. Technically speaking, it's very difficult to target people on mobile today compared to what you do on desktop. I would want this to be easier, so that it's not only apps but also web, because maybe things can be, content can be sometimes easier on our websites and so on. Future apps, then in the US people say, there's an app for every action, more or less. So you look for a restaurant, you use Yelp and nothing else. So it's very verticalized. But still, the platforms like Apple and Google are also providing some vertical apps as well. Maps today, there's no other app than Maps today. I mean, Google bought Waze, and Google Maps are really great. Apple didn't make it, but maybe they make it one day with Maps. But then you don't need any additional, app for Maps today, right? So is the platform going to take over all the verticalities? Do apps become portals? Can they be portals instead of platforms being portals and so on? I have no answer today. Okay, tough one.
We'll never know.
Yeah, no answer, but I mean...
Can you stay with me for one more round? I promise it's a quick one.
Okay.
Right. So it's our last one, and there's only three themes in this round. So again, you'll have 2 minutes for each theme. And this is a game of choice, right? So I'm going to give Guillaume 2 options, and you have to choose your preference, right? So we'll jump right in with our first theme, which is acquisition. So you mentioned earlier about apps going viral, and obviously we're all very lucky if we create an app and it catches on and everyone just wants to download it and share it. But not all apps catch on that quickly, right? So my question is, paid customer acquisition or not?
You need a bit of a push at first, always, because as you said, many apps are not even discovered, right? And then the featuring for me is very important. Platforms have more or less a responsibility, more or less, to help. The problem today is, if you're king, you have more than 100 DAU, 100 million DAU. To get an additional 1 million DAU is very expensive. So those companies would pay 20, 30 US a click. And obviously, if you're a young company on a market where people pay more than 10 US a click and so on, you cannot have 10, 20 million as a budget to exist or something. There's an issue, for instance, in casino games on mobile today. You have two leaders who actually put the price up to $8 to $10 a click, which doesn't allow any newcomer, more or less, to expand in terms of user acquisition, right? And so, and in those categories, more or less, you don't seduce any new customers. I mean, you have 20, 25 million people who play casino games today worldwide, so you have to take from competition. And if you want to take some from competition, this is user acquisition, more or less, right? That helps you to do that. If you do, I don't know, user acquisition for me is a leverage, but marketing should not only buying clicks, it should not be only buying clicks. There are many, many other ways to do marketing stuff, to be recognized, partnerships with other platforms, other games, and so on. I don't really see, on a general basis, I don't really see the cost of a click being really preventing anybody from doing a successful app. I mean, okay. It's something to consider when you expand the business, but you can get the first KPIs to check whether your app is on a good track or not, without really spending a lot. There are people who test their apps on small geographies for 10, 15K US in marketing budget. They can actually get the right KPIs to check whether then you can find the funding with the right KPIs to get more marketing budget. Yeah, go on. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you're sort of in the middle, towards not.
Well, it's not at every moment.
I wasn't asking you another question. You're
sorry,
out of time.
in the middle what?
You're out of time.
Ah, okay.
Right. Key headcount is our second topic. So we know that you can either wait to build the perfect app, or you can launch early and you can iterate. So the question is, in relation to that, where should we allocate our headcount? Should it be more towards development or marketing?
So you need developers at first, of course, right? You don't start with a marketer, right? Because you need code. But if you, again, are you an app-centric business, or are you a business that uses an app to extend your existing business on the web or offline? It's different. So you need to check whether you have to monetize with your app or if you don't have to. If you have to monetize, if you're an app-centric business, if you started as your company with an app and nothing else, then it needs to be a business, meaning you need to really define very quickly whether you're just gathering audience and need to convince additional investors to fund the business until you have hundreds of millions of users, and how long it's going to take. It usually takes years. So companies, just my experience as an investor, it takes about 10 years to do a company that can really, really be so massively scaled that you can sell it later on, exit, and so on. It takes 10 years. Same for funders. You need to be sure that the funders you're funding with are people you want to spend 10 years with, right? So can you really last for 10 years without making any money, just gathering audience that has a value at the cost of being diluted and diluted and diluted every time you raise money, ending up with like 3-5% of a company because you raised it too much? It's really a choice you have to make from the beginning. If you need to be monetizing early on, then of course everything you do has to be in line with the people who will be responsible for the revenues. So the coding phase very, very quickly has to be aligned more or less with the monetization phase. So someone, not automatically marketing, because marketing is how do I promote, how do I extend an existing app and so on, but the guy who's like the revenue officer or something like that, that will understand how to tune the features, the UI, how do I get my people to pay, what kind of model of revenue do I get? Is it subscription? Is it free to play? Is it premium? So very early on, before checking whether you can be very sustainable very quickly. More or less my investments, one sentence, I try all my investments to get profitable and sustainable after 2 rounds only. So seed stage plus Series A, and then you're profitable. You choose whether you want to expand, raise more for your future, but you have to be able to say no as well.
Okay.
So then you need monetization people very early on in the design.
Right, we gave you an extra 10 seconds there.
Okay.
We'll take that off the next one. Just kidding. Right, last question. So for an app with clear monetization goals, do you recommend that we should either focus on one market first, or should we just go for it and expand immediately?
Expanding on mobile doesn't necessarily mean investing in many, if you're on an Android store or an iOS store, you expand naturally, right? So many companies from anywhere in Europe would get like 50% of the revenues in the US anyway, just because they sit on the App Store, right? So expanding is more like, is my content, is my app universal? Is it global? Is it specific to a local market? Do I try to capture the taxi business, for instance, in a place where there's no taxis? I was taking my taxi this morning. A taxi driver was telling me that there were not enough taxis in Dublin for many years because the public transportation was very bad many years ago. So it gave rise to a lot of taxis, 5,000-6,000 in Dublin. That's a lot. And it gave a rise to Halo as well. So Halo is like immensely successful in Dublin because there was a local problem with the transportation system in Dublin. So more or less it's about every time you set up something, project yourself in 5 years or 10 years. How is it going to be my company in 10 years? Does my service work also in many other countries? Is there a particular, so for instance for games, you said Google is not in China. So obviously every time you want to go to China with a game today, it's a really big effort. You have to find partners, it kills your margin. And sometimes they're very difficult to work with because you don't really know what happens with the Chinese people and so on. So it's a big move. And many studios, for instance, or many apps don't go to China right away because they think they should do things that scale immediately and so on, but the Chinese business is really not scalable. It needs to be a separate project, I would say. It is scalable, but you cannot like just flip very, very quickly. So for me, it's like projecting yourself over 5 years. If anything, conclusion, if anything you do right now also applies for what the company should look like or the app should look like in 5 years, do it. If you need to change your business in 2 years so that it applies to a more global business, then stay local and make revenues at first. So for me, it's like think 5 years ahead, but be profitable after 2 years.
Great. Well, thank you. And that was my last question. I'm sure the Irish taxi driver explained a lot of that to you. I don't know if any of you have gotten in an Irish taxi yet, but they just don't stop talking.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for being such a great sport, and thank you for all of the advice. So thank you, Guillaume.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.